business. And we actually have a item for site development plans. And that will comprise of tonight's meeting. Moving forward, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting of October 5th? Commissioner Helfrey?
I'll make a motion.
And Councilman Brost, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Mr. Vunich, does the department have any opening remarks?
Yes, sir. Just one brief one tonight. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Julie and Jacqueline, our economic development manager, interim city and deputy city administrator, for helping out with the Zoom platform tonight. We always have a backup to assist whoever's hosting the meeting, so to speak. So I know it's an extra night for him, and we do appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Newberry, moving on to the public comment session.
Yes, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, we do have several in attendance via Zoom. So if anybody who is in attendance via Zoom who would like to comment during the general public comment session, if they could use the raise hand feature or put something in the chat, and Julian or I will get you in. We do have 2 in attendance here at City Hall who have submitted comment cards. So I'll start there. The first is Ms. Allen. Give her a moment to approach the podium.
Thank you.
Hi. Wow.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. The
I'm
podium
going
is
to
yours.
talk to you tonight about the Bliss Ellisville Superfund site, and specifically the Callahan property, which isn't called the Callahan property. And perhaps if you don't know, half of that property is going on the auction block next week because they didn't pay their taxes. So we have a Superfund site going on the auction block. And then the other half of the property, the city has commissioned a FAIR, gone to work with the EPA, whatever, I'm not sure yet. Phase 1 targeted Brownsfield assessment. I happen to be going through old documents and information, and I came across a very important document that all of you should have a copy of and should really be your Bible when you're moving through these properties. And it is the Human Health Risk Assessment by Dr. Defer. I don't know that it's available anywhere in Wildwood, even though Wildwood paid for it, or we paid for it. But you can go on Superfunds, wildwoodsuperfundsites.com, and it's there. It is a remarkable document, and is more thorough than you have any idea. You will be an expert by the time you're finished reading or even perusing the 88 pages. If you have any questions about Dr. Defer's credentials, he has a 17-page CV. So, you know, the guy is well-known and well-respected. And I just want to read one section because one of the problems is the movement of these toxins. Now, they're going to tell you that the Callahan site is clean. Maybe a little bit of it is, but there's extensive areas that have not been cleaned, have not been probed, have not been tested, nothing. And we know that there are a lot of toxins. But I want to read this section, this paragraph out of his report. The most critical point to consider is that in a karst aquifer, which you all have heard about, water will always have the potential to flow from high to low. Thus, the height of the water table is very important information to know. We don't have a clue. If a known contaminant hotspot exists at a known water table elevation, then that contaminant can spread to any point in the aquifer with a lower water table elevation. All that's required is a pathway connecting high to low points in the water. And in karst flow, this pathway is typically a conduit. And next week, or in 2 weeks, I'm going to bring you a rock so you can see what that looks like. So the conduit is typically unknown and can extend for miles. Hence, the spread of contaminants is both unpredictable and very quick. Unless the point of contamination occurs at a low point in the water table, blah, blah, blah. So let me get to the next part that is really important because it relates to Strecker Forest. He was commissioned because of this whole lawsuit thing with Vern. Both the ponding area, which you can see on Google, and get this, the Callahan property provide potential contaminant threats to all residential and proposed residential areas. And the Bliss property may be a problem, but Bliss is downhill. So this is the deal with the Callahan property, the worst part of it. And I have always known for 20 years that Callahan was the most dangerous site. I thought it was because of all of the number of chemicals that were deposited on that property. That isn't it at all. The most dangerous part of the property that has never been tested sits high. And this stuff goes from high to low. And what it does, it goes underneath Strecker, and it goes into that property, the old Prim property, and into adjacent subdivisions and down into adjacent subdivisions. If the monitoring wells on the Prim property, everyone was shocked when they realized that the wells closest to Strecker Road were the most contaminated. Nobody could figure out why. And that's why if they had gone back and read Dr. Defer's report, it was abundantly clear that the water moves from, and all the contaminants move from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration is across the road. So it is an extremely dangerous piece of property. And you guys are going to be asked to deal with it because the city wants to develop it. It's not developable. You cannot put people on a contaminated piece of property like this. We deserve, and you as our representatives deserve to know the totality of the facts. You have to ensure that bad decisions are not made on these properties. History will judge you for the decisions that you make as these cross your path. This area is in the history books. Every child learns about it, and the story's not over. And the next chapter will go into the history books as well. So that's your lesson for tonight, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the other speaker who's in attendance in City Hall tonight is Mr. Bosworth.
Okay. Mr. Bosworth? Yeah, the podium.
Good evening, Tony Bosworth, Ward 8. I'm here to discuss the fire department issue at 18304 Wild Horse Creek Road. I happen to own 18301 Wild Horse Creek Road, which is directly across the street, and here for several reasons. One, I know everybody's mentioned the Loja property and how close this firehouse will be to Loja, and although the north side of the street is the city of Chesterfield, as you all as a city are probably aware, and certainly staff is, Chesterfield has consistent zoning with Wildwood for the non-urban in this area. And therefore, you know, the 3 acre minimums, there's some variances to that, which mine is one at 1.47 acres. However, you know, the considerations for Loja being close, I'm actually including setbacks about 80 feet from the garage door to my front door. So I'm sorry, the garage door setback a little part of the building. So that's from the closest portion of the northmost portion of the new firehouse building to my front door is approximately 80 feet. So I'm greatly impacted by this. I know this property is my property in this particular case, 18301 is Chesterfield. However, I have talked to my neighbors, and some of them may be on this Zoom call tonight, but people were a little surprised this came before and had a public meeting without public notice being sent out. This was sent out on October 8th, and the last meeting was September 19th. However, it may be a foregone conclusion that since it's a quasi-governmental entity, I may not have any choice in this matter. However, they did close on this on April 23rd before they even talked to the city. So obviously there may be something going on that I have no control over, but I wanted to voice several things. One, the existing fire station west of Highway 109 is 0.45 miles away. It accesses onto a 30-mile-an-hour road versus a 45-mile-an-hour road. There was some comments by Mr. Mandel with FMA Architects that the property wouldn't fit on the existing site, or maybe tight, I think were the words he used. I went back and listened to it today. But physically, including a driveway around the building, it would fit on the existing site. It seems like the single greatest benefit, two benefits probably. One is not having to close a station or not impact a station while building a new station. And secondly, connecting to public sewer, the rest of the utilities are available along Wild Horse Creek Road. So there's some comments made by Mr. Mandel and Mr. I think Jungers was the other guy, but that they're connecting to public sewer. They're actually doing it via a forced main to the east of the property, about a little bit more than half a mile. So those are probably the two biggest benefits of them moving the location. The existing firehouse has been there since the 70s. I understand the need to replace it or upgrade it. However, the properties that are adjacent to it have already been impacted. The site to the west and south of the site is vacant, is approximately 20 acres. The house to the east that borders it is, I think 1.1 acres. It's a very narrow lot and very deep. And then the adjacent property across the street, I believe, is a vacant house, and there's two other houses or two other lots that are vacant, compared to the new site at 18304, which impacts within the same distance about 8 properties. And like I say, mine's the one directly across the street. I'm coming to you as a citizen of Chesterfield, but also a resident of Wildwood. The doors being open, which Member Broyles brought up, I think it was, has a huge impact on the site. I saw in Joe's report that they have about 500 calls a year, which is 1.5 calls a day on average. It could be 3 one day and 0 the next. It does have a huge impact on my property with the sirens going on and off at all times of the night. And we know from having this site, the Metro West site at 109 and Old Manchester, which is in proximity to my house, we hear those sirens go off at all times of the night. So it would probably be a misrepresentation for the fire department to state that they won't ever have sirens going off. And I know that was also a comment of Member Broyles and I think Beatty as well. One of the comments was getting a report, and I think it might be in this package I've got here that is part of the meeting minutes tonight, or meeting data tonight. But I say was supposed to be a 3-part report, and again, maybe in this package I haven't had a chance to look at it. I just got here a few minutes ago. But I don't understand why they couldn't relocate it. I know the mayor referenced the ISO report, and again, maybe in this information, but this site was meant to service to the west and south prior to the expansion and growth of Wildwood in the 80s and 90s. And moving the site closer to the east doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense for a site that's serviced by the Long Road Station just south between Edison and Chesterfield Airport Road. So I am pretty vehemently opposed to this, obviously, because of the location of my house. And the other issue is traffic signalization that may have to be part of this location, as Mr. Mandel acknowledged and the city requested. You obviously can't do a traffic study during these COVID times because they're not going to be representative of what the traffic is on Wild Horse Creek Road at this time, but I don't want a flashing traffic signal in front of my house as well. Plus there will be alignment issues onto my property, which has about 400 feet of frontage and 3 access points, which I have no intention of giving up. So those are my questions. I believe in summary, the mayor and Mr. Mandel commented there would be a 3-part report addressing the traffic, why the ISO report, Mandel was to quantify things like the number of uses of the sirens out of the property. The ISO report is requested by the mayor, and distance to adjacent properties, again, which I am one, and look forward to seeing that report. But unless there is some given standard that because it's a quasi-government entity that this needs to happen here, I am vehemently opposed, and I really don't understand why it can't be moved back to the other site where it serves better for the properties to the west. It serves safety getting on and off of Wild Horse Creek Road on the 30-mile-an-hour road that is traveled about 40% of the traffic count to Wild Horse Creek Road to the east of 109. So those are my comments, and I hope they can be addressed as part of this report. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, that exhausts the number of speaker cards for the general public comment session for people in attendance here at City Hall. Again, we do have several on the Zoom. With your permission, I'd like to give a few moments to allow anyone who would like to comment during the general public comment session to raise their hand or put something in the chat so Julian and I could promote them. If we could just,
Okay, we'll wait a few minutes.
Mr. Chair, it looks like Ms. Loja would like to speak. If you'll give us a moment to promote her to panelist.
Right ahead. Ms. Loja, you'll have to unmute your mic.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, I see heads nodding, so I'm going to assume that you can hear me. I definitely appreciate Mr. Bosworth's comments on the location of the fire station. One comment I will make is that it is my understanding that the firehouse being proposed at this location was originally designed to be at the existing location on the other side of 109. I also agree with his comments that the traffic on this side is much greater than on the other side of Highway 109. And the access is going to be very difficult during certain times of the day. And the fact that this station does service the area of Wildwood to the west of us, that does present some issues that I think the fire department will need to work out, maybe with MoDOT, I'm not sure. But that being said, Melina and I, my daughter, have had multiple on-site meetings with the representatives from the fire department, also from Joe Vunich and Travis from the Department of Planning, and even the architects, along with some of you who have also made the effort to come and look at the site in person. We appreciate each one of you who have put time into working through this with us. The Department of Planning is proposing a solution. Actually, the architects proposed a solution that solved some of our issues, and I believe the Department of Planning is going to present that tonight. It puts all of the living spaces and the public spaces on the eastern portion of the site. This preserves a lot of the privacy of Melina's house. And also the entrance and exit is now going to be onto Wild Horse Creek Road, which reduces the amount of the retaining wall that's required in the back of the firehouse. The solution will also cut down on the impervious surface and stormwater runoff and will only require one bioretention pond in lieu of the proposed two that is shown on the drawing that was included in your packets. We also ask for your support for the department's recommendations concerning the additional design considerations as listed on page 11 of the attachment A, and including the recommendation for the fire department to provide gates across the driveway and easement. This drive is on the same piece of property and there's nowhere to turn around once you turn down the driveway, except to go all the way down to the house. One of the best things about that house is the privacy, and we don't want to lose that with the new firehouse. Also, I understand the Department of Planning has recommended that the fire doors in the rear of the fire station remain. We are asking that in lieu of them not being able to be removed from the design, that there would be consideration placed on the hours that they could be open and used. Maybe between the hours of 8 and 6 in the morning, they could remain closed. Surely there wouldn't be any traffic on the road, and the department or the fire department could easily back their vehicles in during this time. I have driven by there multiple times this week, and every time that I've driven by that particular address, there have been multiple vehicles there from the fire department, and they have all backed in with no problem. So those are my comments, and we appreciate your consideration in this matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry?
Mr. Chair, we'll give a few more moments for anybody else in the attendees, but I would note that Mayor Boland has raised his hand on Zoom.
Mayor Boland? Mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. Number one, relative to the Callahan and Strecker site, I think that these documents have been provided to the commission previously, but if not, and even if so, I think it would be helpful for the commission to get a copy of the city's white papers that were developed after extensive and exhaustive consideration of the evidence presented by the EPA, as well as those that are concerned relative to those sites. I think those were developed in 2017, and they're about 2 pages each or so. So I would ask, if there's no objection, that Joe provide those to the commission as soon as he can do that. That they have background and recommended course of action and so forth. So,
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll send them out tomorrow.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Vunich.
Thank you.
and then Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mayor Boland.
one other item relative to the Monarch item, since we have speakers that are in attendance relative to that. If there would be no objection, one option would be to move that to rearrange the agenda to have that considered now. And if that's the case, then I would, if there's no objection to that, or I can wait if there is, but I have a motion relative to the Monarch fire station matter.
I'll need a motion to replace the order. Councilman Brost, and I need a second. Commissioner Helfrey. So all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It looks like we'll move this right. Item 7B PZ 11-20 to this part of the agenda ahead of the public hearing.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, there is another individual who would like to speak during the public comment session on Zoom.
Okay, we'll do that first.
It's going to be Ms. Loja.
Okay. Ms. Loja, the podium's yours.
Hi, thanks for having me. And thank you to everyone who has come out to the Monarch site, the proposed Monarch site, to see where the actual existing site and its relation to my house. I am the neighbor behind the current location. And I just wanted to echo everything that my mom, Rhonda Loja, said previously. And everything about the traffic study and the rear doors, and with the, we definitely appreciate the reworked design that the architects came up with for the site. I would also like to ask that you guys consider putting a time that the rear doors can be used. I think that if they were to be closed and not used from at night from like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I don't think that that would have much of an impact on the station being able to back the fire trucks up into the front of the fire station, and would also greatly minimize the impacts on me at night, whether that be from lights and sound. And I also wanted to echo what my mom said about the gates in front of my house. Privacy is very important to me, and I worry with a public station at right in front of my house, the people would come down my driveway thinking that it's part of the fire department, and then they would have nowhere to turn around except right at my house. So that part is really important to me to maintain my privacy. So thank you for considering the proposal, and thank you again to everyone who has come out and seen the site and heard me talk. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, I'll just do one last explanation. If anybody in attendance on Zoom would like to speak at the general public comment session time, we'll just give it a few seconds. And I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand or identify themselves in the chat for the public comment session.
Okay, so we'll move on to this item. Mr. Newberry, are you reading the request?
Yes, Mr. Chair. PZ 11-20 Monarch Fire Protection District, care of FGM Architects, Inc., 1 Metropolitan Square, Suite 1945, St. Louis, Missouri, 63102. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU non-urban residence district for a 3-acre tract of land that is located on the south side of Wild Horse Creek Road at its intersection with Etherton Road. Street address is 18304 Wild Horse Creek Road and 18304 Wild Horse Creek Road, Unit A, St. Louis County, locator numbers 19W510215 and 19W510194. Proposed use, a new fire station with living quarters and associated parking areas. Public sanitary sewer service is planned to be extended to the site. Ward 1.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, turn it over to you.
Mr. Chair, I believe the mayor may have a comment before I start.
Mayor Boland.
Actually, I have a motion. And the background for the motion is when this was previously presented to the commission, I made some comments and requests specifically relative to some key items. And one of those was what statistical data or other reliable concrete evidence suggests that the site of this facility should be where it is being proposed versus where the fire district has its current location on the west side of 109. And I've looked at the material and I'm still not seeing, that's been provided, and unless I missed it, I'm still not seeing where any of that information. And so I would ask that this be postponed until the next meeting, or yeah, I guess the next meeting would probably give them time to provide that, to see what the evidence is, what the statistical data, what study was done or studies were done relative to why the location is better here than where the fire district has its current location on the west side of 109. Now, I'm not making the motion rhetorically. I'm making the motion because I would like to see that information. And in conjunction with that, I don't think this was part of the my prior comments, but given the elevations that I've seen this evening, I'd like to also see, and I would suggest that the commission may want to see elevations of what the fire station would look like where it's being proposed, as well as on the west side of 109, vis-a-vis all of the residence homes and other structures that are around it. So my motion is to postpone for 2 weeks, or until the next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm assuming that's in 2 weeks, so that we can see those two items. That's my motion.
Sorry, Commissioner Levitt, second.
I'll second it, and I have a comment.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. This be a voice vote. Okay. I'll do a voice vote and we'll start now. All those in favor of postponement, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? So we are postponed. Question for Mr. Vunich. All the items that we had requested under the last meeting of October, what was it, the 5th? Did they address all these items as Mayor Boland says, or are there still outstanding items? And is 2 weeks enough time to do this? And if they don't have this available, then what is our course of action?
Well, I must apologize for the department. I believe, or I should say, I believed that all of the items that had been requested as part of the public hearing process had been provided as part of the packet of information you received tonight. Obviously, I was incorrect in that I do not remember the statistical or data analysis, and that's my mistake, certainly not the fire districts. From the perspective of the department, we spent the last 4 weeks working on revisions to the site design to address concerns about surrounding neighbors, particularly the loggias, which are Wildwood properties versus those across the street from the site, which is in the city of Chesterfield. So again, I accept responsibility if the statistical or data analysis showing why this particular site is more suitable for the fire station than a retrofit at the existing location west of State Route 109. So we'll coordinate with the fire district to see if they have that site analysis that was done prior to the purchase of the property here at Etherton Road and Wild Horse Creek Road. And then again, the footprint of the building placed relative to the surrounding development pattern, I think can be done by the architects with some ease.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman or Commissioner Beatty.
In addition, I would like to see a map of the coverage area for the station when it comes back as well.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Sorry. So I have a request, but also I'm going to read Mr. Levitt's comment. My request would be, unless I've missed it, whatever the design changes were to the proposal, if they would show us a drawing with those changes made, I would be grateful for that. I don't see it in the packet unless I've overlooked it. And then I'd like to read Mr. Levitt's comment. Mr. Levitt would like to know if one of the reps of the fire district has a comment regarding the data on why the location was chosen. Thank you.
Mr. Vunich?
Ms. Helfrey, I believe that there is the original set of documents, including the plan sheets that show the location of the proposed fire station at the public hearing. And then there's another set of drawings that reflect the alternatives that were studied based upon feedback that was provided at the public hearing. So I believe they're in there, and certainly we can do a better job of identifying them for you.
Mr. Rich, do you happen to know, like on my computer, it says pages, 103 pages. I must just be missing them. Do you have a page number for that by any chance? Of the, oh, look there, yay. Thank you. What page is that on?
I'd have to defer to Mr. Newberry, my expert. Here, if I may offer to the commission members, we'll strip down the packet and send you the original preliminary development plan along with these alternatives so that you're just looking at the changes.
Okay. Commissioner Broyles?
Yes, I had an opportunity to meet Loge. Is that how you pronounce the name? Rhonda Loge, at the site. And I would need some more information also about the creek bed that is behind this proposal for the fire station and how that is going to be impacted by this development. Can that be added?
Certainly,
Mayor Boland, I'll turn it over to you.
Just point of information. Number one, if there's no objection from anyone, Commissioner Broyles' request could be added to the motion. I would certainly have no problem with it as the maker of the motion. Number two, I think that the comments or requests made by Commissioner Levitt and Beatty would be included within the motion itself in terms of providing the information that they've requested, or at least that would be my expectation.
So I have an official motion to include the data on the creek impact. I'll need a second for that. Commissioner Depler, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so we're postponed with two items, data and the impact to the creek. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Jackson?
Yeah, I just want to make sure there's clarification because the last meeting, it seemed like there were two issues. You had the old station and the property, and it was not big enough to tear down and build back in that location, if I remember correctly. And with the design changes, is that still true? And I think it was optimal to take the new property to build in advance so you weren't missing a fire station being torn down and et cetera. I just want to make sure that that's accurate because of the considerations as Wildwood grows, you would want a larger facility, more capacity, et cetera, et cetera. And if it can't happen in the old location, that's out. That kind of feeds into why that location would be my commentary, I guess. Thanks.
I'm assuming that's part of the data that Mayor Boland has requested that has not been presented. Seeing no other comments, Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, thank you for recognizing me. I owe an apology to Ms. Helfrey and to the commission members that sheet that showed the alternatives was not included in your packet. I'm not quite sure why it wasn't in there, but it's not, so my apology. You will receive that first thing tomorrow.
Okay. Seeing no further action, let's move back to our agenda and we'll work into the public hearing. At this point in time,
Before we do that, did you see Commissioner Levitt's comments in the about asking if we could ask Ms. Milner or if she had a response to any of our comments while she was here? Is that allowed or?
at this point, I think we need something in written form from the fire department to submit so that we can address Mayor Boland's issues. So I would propose that this be put together so that we can all review it as requested.
Okay. Commissioner Levitt said that's good.
Okay. Mr. Newberry, I'll move on to the public hearing. In the city of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions concerning this item. Since this request is being presented at a public hearing, no action is planned on this item tonight, and consideration is to be taken no earlier than November 2nd, 2020. This approach ensures members of the Planning and Zoning Commission will hear all opinions before taking any action. The city's Department of Planning will address the comments, questions, and concerns that are raised tonight and include them as part of their formal recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission will allow all parties adequate time to present their positions. Persons in attendance at City Hall wanting to speak or receive future information on this item should fill out a speaker's card and leave it with Mr. Newberry. Those in attendance via Zoom webinar platform should use the raise hand feature to indicate if you wish to speak at this hearing. A team member will add you to the list of speakers, and then they will communicate to me, and as chair, I will invite you to speak when it is your turn. In addition, information on this item can be found on the city's website at www.cityofwildwood.com. The commission would like to thank you for your cooperation and participation in tonight's hearing. Mr. Newberry, will you read PZ 13-20?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Newberry will be narrating a slide presentation.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe.
So Mr. Vunich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. PZ 13-20, Mark and Nancy Fish, 1570 Old State Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038, care of SunPro Solar, MCH Road, Manville, Louisiana, 70471. A request for a conditional use permit, CUP, in the NU non-urban resident district, street address 1570 Old State Road, locator number 25U 440043, for the installation of roof-mounted solar panels, which are to be situated on the dwelling and accessory structure, garage, as to be visible from adjoining roadways. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the panel's placement on the front-facing area of the roofs of the dwelling and accessory structure. This particular site is located in Ward 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Give me a moment. I'll share my screen. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, this first slide is, this is the first slide. This first slide depicts the property in the light blue outline. Its location on Old State Road, south of Old Fairway. This next slide is an enlarged version of the property itself. On this slide, where my cursor is, that you can see the home, the detached garage, and then the driveway onto Eagle Ridge Road in this area of the site. The next slide is a depiction of the planned arrays on the home, which again is located here, and the detached accessory structure is here. Have that right? Next is the beginning of a photo slideshow. This is standing on Eagle Ridge Road, looking towards the property to the north. Off to in the left portion of the site, you can see Old State Road and the intersection with the stop sign. This is a photo standing on Eagle Ridge Road, looking towards the accessory dwelling. This is standing on the west side of Old State Road, looking towards the home, or towards the property, excuse me. This is a little bit farther to the north, looking the same direction. And a little bit farther to the north. And that concludes the department's slideshow presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. I'll turn it over to Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, I believe there is the petitioner or petitioner's representative in attendance tonight, and I would ask them to do a brief presentation regarding the proposal.
Are they on Zoom or in the council chamber?
I think Mr. Ingram is
I'm through
representing.
Zoom. Good evening, I'm John Ingram. I'm with Sunpro Solar, and I'm the petitioner for the Fish residence and for the solar panel, proposed solar panel system that we have that we're looking to install on top of the roof. With these structures being setbacks so far from the road, and then also with fairly sufficient screen of trees that block the view from Old State Road to their house, to their homes. We feel that this is a fairly appropriate setting to be able to put these panels to where they won't be necessarily all that visible from the street throughout most of the year. And given also that the pitch of the roofs are relatively low as well, that we believe that they'll just blend in with the background that's the surrounding area, as well as blend in with the darkness of the trees and the shade that's set behind the trees. It's our hope that you would go ahead and approve this, given the fact that it is a fairly well set back assemble or installation, and that it won't consider or won't necessarily create any type of visible disturbance or visual disturbance to the adjacent neighboring properties, as well as to any of the traffic that's passing to the east or to the west of the property along Old State Road. We'll also, the panels themselves are black with a black frame. They do have some silver bussing inside them, but with the black frames, and then we'll be painting the frames, all the metal attachment parts, so that they'll blend in as well. The space between the surface of the roof and the underside of the panel is 5 inches. The panels are parallel with the roof, and so they're essentially 6.5 inches above the roof surface. With them being such a, in this case, a large setting of panels, they are in a fairly uniform pattern and shape to where there's nothing really out of the ordinary that's going to cause it to stand out with any kind of like any type of a sawtooth look or anything like that.
Thank you. Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, are there any questions of the petitioner's representative or the Department of Planning? We'd be glad to answer them at this time.
I'll open the floor up for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we do have a speaker for the public hearing.
Okay.
If you would like, I can call her forward and ask her to speak from the podium.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Quarternick, and I live just across the street from the folks that are going to do the solar panels. And I'm just wondering, when the trees are bare, will those panels have a reflective nature? Because the setting sun will be pointing in that direction. So I didn't know if they might be very reflective in my direction or not.
That's a very good question. And our belief is that the busting that's in the panels themselves, or to the silver busting in the panels, are reduced to a point where the reflection is very minimal. As well, the shallow pitch of the panels will not cause any type of reflective quality. And the fact that they are black, and the idea is that they do absorb light, is that they do not reflect light, much like you would see like a window would reflect light, or a skylight. That these panels essentially, in a way, more or less absorb light, only have only a minimal amount of reflection, but not enough to where it's going to bounce light back into somebody else's field of vision, where it would cause any type of visible or visual disturbance in such a way.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the commission? Mayor Boland.
Yeah, so one of the reasons the commission may recall with relatively recently, we had some information in I believe a meeting on the solar panel regulations of our city. And one of the reasons that came about, and I believe I may have been the one who made the motion to do that, is because after a lot of thought, we developed a set of standards for solar panels. And it was extensive thought. And yet we continue to have these requests for variances from it. And I'm not speaking to the environmental nature of this, because I fully support that. But at the end of the day, if we continue to grant variances from what our rules say should be the case, then we might as well not have the rules. So I think this is just a public hearing and there's no action required. Is that correct, Joe, at this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But I would just ask, as we go forward with this, and it appears, since we're having pretty much one of these at about every meeting, as a commission that represents the city and the rules and the policies that this commission and the council have adopted, that we may want to be mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. One item that I would like to interject to Mr. Ingram is that the reason we have this ordinance, and the reason you're coming and presenting to us, is that your action does not comply with the strict zoning. And it's because of the view corridors and screening issues. Going back to Mr. Newberry's slideshow, there was one slide that the roof could be, physically easily seen from Old State Road. And all activity that we've done up to this date would require total screening or landscaping for this type of conditional use permit. So I would anticipate that would be a requirement to add more trees to block that view corridor from Old State Road as a condition. So I just offer that up, and you can proceed accordingly.
Well, Mr. Chairman, may I ask, typically when screening is requested of any sort, that's usually on a ground-mounted solar panel system. And I believe Mr. Newberry can attest to the fact that we've had ground-mounted solar panel systems that have been presented before in Wildwood, where screening has been included in the design to be able to shield the view. But it was not my understanding that for roof-mounted surfaces, that screening was something that was in general was requested, and only for the fact that you do need to essentially generate some mature trees in a way to be able to screen a surface or a roof surface, from the street. If the panel system itself is essentially the size of the roof, or the majority of the panel system is the size of the roof, I'm not really quite sure how that's different from just seeing the roof, as opposed to seeing dark panels, and dark panels that essentially kind of blend in with the background.
No, your point is well taken. I'm just saying that anything that is facing a public street or road, we have required substantial screening of the actual panel itself. So that being said, you might want to consider that.
Sure. We'll take that under consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Vunich.
And again, what I would like to explain, I will depend on John Young to correct me. The conditional use permit process is not a waiver or variance. It is a component of each and every zoning district, in that there are uses that are permitted by right and those under the condition. And in fact, if a conditional use permit is granted by the Planning and Zoning Commission, it cannot be less restrictive than the underlying regulations associated with the zoning district designation. It can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive. The thought behind having a conditional use permit process for certain solar panels was to have the ability to make additional requirements given the individual circumstances of each lot. So I want to emphasize that by the conditional use permits being applied for and submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission is not because they're seeking a waiver or a change. The commission cannot do that. They cannot be less restrictive than the underlying codes. What we're looking at is to make sure that there is a minimal impact, if any, at the end of the day, if the permit is granted. Thank you.
And just to clarify, this is a site-specific conditional use permit. So as this moves forward, it's site-specific, and that's why I brought up the issue with the trees. Mayor Boland.
Well, I guess I have a question. If someone's proposing to do something that is greater than what we require, why do we need to approve it? And maybe that's a question for the city attorney.
Well, Mr. Young signs on. What I would say is, I may have explained it wrong. Again, it's not necessary for the petitioner to do more. It's sometimes in the benefit of the city to ask for more.
Mr. Young?
Yeah, and to Joe's point is correct. The conditional use permit process is intended to establish a greater set of regulations than would otherwise be applied for specific circumstances, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission has the ability to review them to consider whether additional protective measures are necessary. So those are the conditions of the conditional use permit. So, but if an applicant meets all the requirements, satisfies all the conditions, it is an administrative consideration. So it's not a waiver or variance of any of the city's regulations. It is a review of the specific circumstances applicable to the application under the specific regulations that are set. And if they meet those regulations and satisfy the conditions, it should be approved.
Thank you, Mayor Boland.
Yeah, but John, with all due respect, I mean, we've had these presented to us at essentially every meeting or so for the last several months. And in each instance, we have been focusing on, I believe, because of the rules that we developed that were not being potentially fully complied with, the view of the solar panels, the cutting of trees and so forth. So if they are complying with everything in our rules, why would we want to, why are we being asked to do something as a conditional use permit?
And I would say I would ask Mr. Vunish to correct me if I'm wrong though, but the way this was configured within the last year, after the amount of study and review that you mentioned earlier, Mayor, was to provide for an administrative approval that doesn't require a conditional use permit process and P&Z approval, but under some certain circumstances that do require Planning and Zoning Commission review and analysis. And I believe this just falls into one of those categories that the Planning and Zoning Commission said, we would like this to go through Planning and Zoning review and consideration because of the specific criteria or specific element associated with this request, which is the visibility of the arrays from the street.
Okay, and so therefore, if I may, Mr. Chairman, if there's no visibility issue, then we wouldn't be dealing with this. And that's been the issue with several of these. And so I think we're all saying the same thing and potentially talking past each other a bit. But all I'm trying to suggest relative to the commission's benefit is we have a set of rules that were developed relative to these panels. And we seem to be having a lot of requests to do something that's different or what have you. And I would just urge caution relative to that. And that's it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. One item just to, because I've been involved with this for a long time and I was on the original commission when we created this, is the reason that we are reviewing this is that the panels are facing the street. Okay, the visibility is an action item that we can use to mitigate that view corridor. And that is why I brought up the issue with the trees. So Mr. Vunish, if I'm wrong, correct me, but it's because of the potential visibility from the street on that side of the roof.
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I may say one more thing, and that is that the only available roof portions that actually are adequate for generating power happen to be just those roof portions. There is the one portion that faces to the northeast, but the generation of that panel, the reason that array is that it's significantly larger than the others only because it takes more panels to be able to generate even close, even half the percentage of the panels that actually do face to the southwest. That's why we have panels facing to the south and to the southwest. Otherwise, if we could, we would put them on the backside if the backside were facing in more desirable directions that are more advantageous for power generation, which then leads you to the question of, well, then some properties within the neighborhood actually are better suited or more suited towards having their panels on portions that don't face the street, whereas other ones are not, and then are forced to have them face the street, but yet you have all the same people paying taxes to the same city, and at the same time, one group being told, no, you may not, but then another group being told, yes, you may.
You are absolutely correct. And that is why we deal with the discrepancy with screening issues. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Jackson.
For the city attorney, I just need some clarification. So the rules that we have for solar, are they considered a code, a city code?
Yes, the city has codified its regulations.
So you meet that code or you do not. It's a city enforcement issue. And now we're looking at an exception, but the exception is it's outside the code. So it goes back to, and I don't want to put words in Mayor Boland's mouth, but he said earlier, we're making exceptions. Why have a rule? If this may be a city enforcement issue, if you don't meet the code as set forth, then why is this before P&Z? And that's just, maybe no one wants to answer that or not, but that's my 2 cents.
Commissioner Beatty.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of echo what I said when we were discussing the rules on the solar panels. And this is kind of why I feel like roof-mounted solar panels should just be allowed by right, because I tend to agree with Mr. Ingram in that it is kind of discriminatory, because you want your solar panels on the sides of the roof facing south, and that's automatically going to eliminate half of the houses in the city from being able to do solar without having to do extra and potentially excessive screening just so people can't see them from the street. What about in the town center where you're probably not going to be able to fit enough trees or big trees close enough to the houses to where you're going to block every single panel from the view of the street?
I can appreciate the comment, but that is not the way our ordinance is written. And the reason we're entertaining it is because of the nature of the layout. So that's the comments. If the applicant wants to propose additional screening with trees from the street, then we would hear that as the presentation. So we have to go with the ordinance code as Commissioner Jackson said, and then we can make an action based upon the request as a conditional site-specific approval of this application when it comes forth.
Yeah, no, I understand all that. My point being is that's why I was in support of loosening the restriction when we were discussing it a few months ago.
Mr. Vunich.
I believe Mayor Bolin has his hand raised.
Mayor Bolin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, with all due respect to Commissioner Beatty, who I respect greatly, and Mr. Ingraham, if we went down the road of arguing that every difference in someone's property was something that prohibited them from complying with a rule, we would end up with complete chaos. Someone who's on a track that they have to put a septic system in, but they can't put it here, they have to put it there because the land is configured in a certain way. Someone who has a setback line in a certain way because their lot is configured as a triangle as opposed to a square or a rectangle. We have the rules, and I would suggest we consider those very carefully before we continue to grant variances to this. Thanks.
Well, I do believe that there is a proposed amendment to the state of Missouri statutes called the Missouri Solar Right Act, which does address the fact that homes or properties that are not allowed to be able to generate, or that are not allowed to have solar panels on certain portions of roofs only because they're not allowed within that jurisdiction, only for the fact that they do face a street or they face onto some type of a right of way, that they do be granted the right to be able to show that without being able to use those portions, those roof portions, that their generation is not substantially dropped to the point where it would only be at maybe 50 to 40% of what the generation could be if they were allowed to have those portions, those solar panel portions, those roof portions that are facing the street. And that is something that is currently being addressed up in the state, with the state. It has not been voted on, it has not been added, but it's verbiage, and it's verbiage that I do run into in a lot of jurisdictions where they do have an appeals even within their city code for roof portions for specific properties where there's existing trees that cast shadows. It could be that those trees that cast shadows on somebody's roof portions are from another person's property, to where they have no way of being able to even change those or affect those trees if they needed to. But yet, at the same time, the only portions that they do have available are portions that are visible from the street, but yet those are the portions of roof that do create the generation that they do to be able to provide power for their house.
And when that is passed, we will consider it as a city. And until then, I think we need to look at the overall function of this relative to the city as a whole, as opposed to a one-off basis on a lot by lot situation, because that will probably not end well. I appreciate your comments.
Are there any other comments before we close the hearing?
Mr. Lee, if we could just give the opportunity for some attendees in Zoom to
Sure.
raise their hand. Thank you. I'll just say it briefly. If you're in attendance via Zoom and would like to comment during this public hearing, if you could use the raise hand feature or put something in the chat, we'll let you in to address the commission. Not seeing any, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to do that.
Seeing no further comment, can I have a motion to close the public hearing? Commissioner Helfrey, I need a second. Commissioner Jackson, second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Public hearing is closed. So, moving on, we have two items of old business. The first is another solar panel. Mr. Newberry, are you reading PZ 12-20?
Mr. Chair, I am.
Okay, Mr. Newberry, or I'm sorry, Mr. Vunich, go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the next item is PZ 12-20, Mary Cook, 2031 Joe's Way, Wildwood, Missouri, 63005. Care of Straight Up Solar, 11696 Lilburn Park Road, St. Louis, Missouri, 63146. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU non-urban resident district, street address 2031 Joe's Way, locator number 20U 530040, for the installation of roof-mounted solar panels, which are to be so situated on the dwelling and accessory structure, garage, as to be visible from an adjoining roadway. The request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415090 NU Non-Urban Resident District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the panel's placement on the front-facing area of the roofs of the dwelling and accessory structure, which abut a private roadway. This particular location is in Ward 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, assuming you will do a presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The department has prepared for your consideration tonight an information report with recommendation regarding the request that Mr. Vunich just read into the record. The request is for a conditional use permit for solar panels that are visible from a private roadway, Joe's Way. In reviewing the request, the department has determined that the request for the conditional use permit is consistent with the 4 criteria for granting of a conditional use permit, which must be met before the commission can make a recommendation for its approval. The department would like to begin its presentation by going through some of the items that the code requires under the conditional use permit requirements relating to solar panels that are visible from the adjacent street. The first of which is that the support rack and framing for the solar panels be a color that is to match the roof, or a dark in color, as has been described in the past. This request meets those requirements. Another component that the department would like to bring to the Planning and Zoning Commission's attention is that the code does require that homeowners association provide a comment on any request. The department would note that this particular lot is not located within a subdivision that is party to a homeowners association. However, it would note that 2 mailing notifications were provided to within 3,000 feet of the property, and the petitioner solicited comments from her most nearby neighbors. The department received 6 supportive comments, many of which live on Joe's Way, a private drive, and 1 comment that was not supportive, but did not provide any rationale for it not being supported. The petitioner is not proposing to remove any trees in association with the solar panels. And other components that were recently updated in the code in August 2020 relating to permitting, fire district review, and other components have been complied with, this being the first solar panel to be reviewed under the updated regulations that were updated in August of 2020. Department would conclude by again saying that it is determined that the proposed solar panel placement meets the 4 criteria required under the conditional use permit process. And with that, if commission members have any questions, I'm available, and Mr. Unish is available to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. I'll open the floor up for discussion or motion. Well, I was going to go ahead and then I'll catch up with Councilman Bros. The paperwork that's submitted in the packet shows a silver frame. So do we have documentation that this is a black frame?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have some photographs that were provided by the petitioner's representative that depicts the frame that was selected. Their explanation to the department was that the manufacturer does not provide catalog cut sheets or detailed sheets that show the black framing. It was certainly a question the department raised early in our conversations with the petitioner.
Okay, can you put that photo in the documentation for this request? That would be helpful.
Yes, sir. And by way of explanation, the department received the photographs after the packet was published and posted on the city's website. And I am sharing my screen with the photos that were provided by the petitioner's representative.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other, I'll go back to Councilman Brost.
Yeah, I was just going to make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Seeing no other hands raised, do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Levitt.
Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Cohn.
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles.
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty.
Yes.
Commissioner Depler.
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes.
Chair Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Brost.
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
I am in favor of the environmental effect and appreciate the effort to do their best to work around the rules. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to focus a little more on those rules. And so my vote is no. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes by a vote of 9-1. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Helfrey.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Moving on, we have a site development plan.
A report with recommendations regarding the City of Wildwood's Old State Road Shared Use Path Project, R2 15,000 square foot resident district and R3 10,000 square foot resident district with two separate planned environment units, PEU, such being previously authorized by St. Louis County on publicly right-of-way and privately held lands located along the north side of Old State Road between Old State Place East End and Nantucket Island Drive West End, thereby recommending the approval of the planning and design concept plans for the installation of this necessary connection along a heavily traveled St. Louis County arterial roadway, Old State Road. This project is located in Ward 7.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before the department begins its presentation on this particular item, I would note that Mr. Rick Brown, the city's Director of Public Work, is in attendance tonight and available for questions or comments as well. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, as you know, the City of Wildwood has a very aggressive approach to providing adequate and safe pedestrian facilities for all of its residents and visitors. Since the inception of the city has added numerous trail corridors along the major arterials that are located within this community. For example, those major arterials include State Route 109 and State Route 100. One major arterial that has an extensive amount of traffic that has a broken pattern of pedestrian facilities is Old State Road. The location of this proposed shared use path would create a continuous link along the north side of Old State Road between the areas of Nantucket, the enclaves at Cherry Hills, and many of the other subdivisions located on the north side of Old State Road to Ridge Road, and then ultimately the Rock Hollow Valley and the Rock Hollow Trail. As mentioned in the report, the department believes that the Rock Hollow Trail and the valley it is located is one of the most scenic in all of the state of Missouri, and certainly providing safe and functional access to that to many of the residential subdivisions approved by St. Louis County on the north side of Old State Road is appropriate. It is appropriate from the standpoint of our access and mobility plan, which supports it. In the report, the department provides detailed information regarding the trail. Its length, 3,700 feet, its intended width, 10 feet, and then finally, its material, a pervious asphalt in many locations. Along with that information, it describes the construction components, meaning that it'll be on private property in certain instances, but the majority will be in public right-of-way in conjunction with the St. Louis County Department of Transportation. It is important to also note that many years ago, the St. Louis County, City of Ellisville, and the City of Wildwood talked about improvements to Old State Road. One of those improvements, beyond lane widening and improvements, topical safety improvements, was a shared use path just like this. The Department of Public Works, with authorization from the City Council, has submitted a grant application in support of this particular trail. The timeline for its construction, for the most part, is in that time frame of 2022 and 2023, given the grant application process. The department has an aerial photograph that shows the length of the trail and the relationship of surrounding residential subdivisions. So Mr. Newberry would share his screen. And as you can see, it is in an area of higher residential development, primarily all authorized by St. Louis County. A unique component of this particular trail is also the extension of a connector or feeder trail on Waterside Drive to the subdivisions to the north. Waterside Drive was intended to be a public street to connect Old State Road. It has not occurred, and this would be an appropriate utilization of the public right-of-way to provide pedestrians increased access again to this portion of the city. In the report, the department gives a number of rationales or reasons for its support, again noting the mobility and access plan and the action plan update for Parks and Recreation that was completed in 2018 and adopted and endorsed by both the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. Given these reasons or rationales, the department is presenting the corridor study maps and the overall aerial photograph for a favorable recommendation tonight. By doing so, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be following state statute that requires all infrastructure projects of this nature to be reviewed and acted upon by the Planning and Zoning Commission. With that, again, Mr. Brown, Mr. Newberry, and I are available for any questions or comments after the floor is open for discussion or a motion is made. Thank you.
We'll open up the floor for discussion. I have Commissioner Beatty first, and then we'll come back and get Commissioner Levitt.
I move to support the department's recommendation. I do have one question though. Is there, I saw that you're going to, the plan is for a 10-foot path along here, but where east of where it ends to Ridge Road, I know that's only about a 5 or 6 foot path. Is there any potential for widening that in conjunction with this?
Well, I can explain the change in width, and I'll let Mr. Brown explain the process. When the city approved that first segment of trail on the north side of Old State Road, it was in the shadows of that discussion with St. Louis County and the city of Ellisville about a road improvement project from Ridge Road to Old State Spur. So the thought was at that time that the trail may be temporary in nature. And so we did our best to provide a minimum width to meet ADA requirements, but not to overspend in the event the project moved forward. The project hasn't moved forward, and so therefore it is there providing service, but again, it's not a 10-foot width. Again, Mr. Brown can comment on if that was looked at or not. Thank you.
As far as the segment to the north, I guess what I would suggest, or what I'd mentioned before, was that that could be a phase 2 in the future. Of course, it would be additional funding. It would not be part of the funding request that we've made thus far to East West Gateway. But once this was in place and being utilized, there could be a second phase where that section was upgraded to the standard width potentially. And or it could be done if there were ever improvements to Old State Road that were programmed and funded through St. Louis County. So hopefully in the future that could occur.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Levitt.
Just a second, and this will be good for Ward 7.
I have one question for staff, and that is safety. Do we need any guardrails similar to what we've done on Manchester with the traffic speed on Old State? There are a few sections that are fairly close to the road.
I'll be glad to respond to that if you like. I guess I would suggest that we're a little early yet to know for sure, but I think that's a good point that's well taken, that when we get into the design components of the project, we'll certainly have to look at the proximity of the path relative to the road and the need for barriers, and if they're warranted, and I'm sure we'll be glad to include them in the project.
Thank you. Are there any other discussion items? Seeing none, let's move into a roll call vote. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Duckworth,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Hofree,
Yes.
Commissioner Levitt,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our scheduled items. Does the department have any comments?
Yes, sir. Just thank you all for attending tonight. We do appreciate it.
So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Broyles, second by Commissioner Beatty. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.